This is Janice Black from Boise Basin Quilters Block of the Month again. And in February we have this block which we're calling Transparent Ohio Stars. Ohio Stars is a fairly basic block. It's just a variation of a 9 patch. As you can see, it's made from 9 squares, 3 across, 3 down. But the real challenge this month is that we would like you to try to choose your fabrics in such a way that you create an illusion of transparency, as if the different layers overlap from the center to the points in this transition area. So I'd like to give a few suggestions on how to make that happen. You're going to need 3 fabrics in the same color. 3 fabrics in the same color that have different values. They should have noticeably different values, but there shouldn't be too great of a value contrast. In this sample block that I tried for this month, I had carefully chosen my fabrics and it still didn't turn out quite so well as I had hoped. I started with a dark greenish yellow, a medium one, but then I think I went to one that was too light, so I made too big of a value jump there in my contrasts. I think I might have had better luck if I'd chosen a fabric with a little less of a value contrast for that center square. If you look at this sample block that Petra made, for example, you can see that she really didn't go light, medium, and dark. It's more like a medium, lighter, and even lighter. So if you have a little bit less of a value change, you might be more successful with your color attempts. One thing that can be really helpful when you're choosing your fabrics for this project is if you have a good color tool. This is one that I have that's made by Joan Wolfram, and I really love it. It acts sort of the way a color wheel would, but it's even more useful than that. If you choose any of these colors that are out here, this is what they would look like in their pure forms. But then if you take a close look at the card for that color, it will have the pure color in the center. Then it shows what you would get if you added white to it, the different tints of it, or what you would get if you added black to it, which are the different shades. It also shows you on the back even more selections, including what it would look like with different amounts of gray added to it, which are called the tones. So having something like this can be really helpful in making your color selections. If you take a look at these fabrics that I pulled from my stash, I would think they're probably all shades of burgundy or maroon or purple, but sometimes it actually is kind of hard to identify what exact color that is. I pulled this one out here. I would think of it as a purple, but if I bring my color chart over here and start comparing the blackened shades, it turns out fuchsia's pretty close, but I think it's actually a blackened shade of magenta. So if I want to find lighter colors or more grayed out colors to go with it, now I know that I need to be staying in the magenta family instead of, for example, purple, which would throw me way off base. When you're trying to choose fabrics for this special effect too, there might be a few things that would surprise you, and these color cards can kind of help you figure that out. For example, let's say that you chose an olive. I think of olive as being a green, a combination of yellow and blue. So that might throw me off if I had an olive and I was trying to choose slightly different values of it. In reality, olive is a blackened form of yellow. So if I wanted something to go with a light olive, I might not intuitively realize that yellow is the direction to go. I still wouldn't want to stray too far to be successful with this effect, so I wouldn't want to choose like a pure yellow and then like a dark olive. There'd be too much contrast, but I do need to know then that I'll need to stay within the yellow color family in order to get that effect if I'm going with that. Golden yellow too, you can see kind of shades down to some olive brown looks there. Another example would be this block that I did for different projects, so it has a different background. But a surprise again for me with working with color was I didn't realize that browns are actually the blackened shades of orange and orange reds. I didn't know that. So this happened almost kind of by accident, but you can see that what's going on here is my center square is a little purer of an orange, and then as I move out, I'm getting to the blackened shades, and that's what's happening. The prints actually have some play in what's going on here, because this is a color that you might get in paint by taking these colors and stirring in some black. But this transition part right here actually has these shades of orange red with some black, a subtle black print in there. So you're kind of creating the effect whether you're getting the shade you'd get by stirring the black in, or if you're getting a print that actually has a little bit of black in it. For that to work, you still want your print to be fairly subtle. If you use a bold print, you're going to have a really hard time creating the effect you're after. But if you really do want to use a bold print, I would suggest using it in the center or in the points instead of in this transition area. And it actually worked fairly well with this one, and it was kind of fun to fussy cut that print in the center. In this block, all of the fabrics are chartreuse, you can see from the color card. What's actually going on is the center is a solid chartreuse in a lighter color. The points are a really dark chartreuse, but if you look closely, they do have a little bit of a lighter print in there to help blend it. And then this transition one is very much of a blend between the darker chartreuse and the solid in the center. So you can actually use prints to help you get the illusion that you're after. So I hope this month you will have a lot of fun choosing some fabrics that can get the best optical illusion of transparency going that you can. If you fail, it's okay. It'll probably still be a beautiful block. This would be a really great month though to use the Facebook page to upload some photos of your fabric choices before you sew the block and maybe get some feedback from some other people on whether it seems like they're working or not. Because even if you're following the guidelines as carefully as you can, it really still is an art to choose ones that get the look that you're going for. Okay, I promised to actually tell you how to sew this block. So once again, it's a variation of a 9 patch. The corner squares and the center squares are just that. They're just simple squares. They're cut to 4.5 inches. I've gone with this magenta fabric now and found one that was a little grayer and a little grayer. It's getting lighter. So I have 4 squares for my corners and a center square. So for these 4 squares, what you're going to need is one background square that's going to end up 1/4 of it here, 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 and here. Need one of the transition fabric squares, which is going to end up 1/4 of it here, 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 and here. And then you're going to need 2 of the points fabrics because they're going to end up in all of these spots. You may have noticed that these squares that are going to be used for the quarter square triangles are larger than the squares for the corner and the center. The reason for that is these 4 squares are going to have seam allowances taken out of them twice, once this way and once that way. So the math for doing the squares for a block like this is whatever size of square you're wanting to use for the center and the corner, you'll just need to add 1 1/4 inches for the squares that you're going to be using for your quarter square triangles. If you want to, you can add slightly more than 1 1/4 inches. You can choose maybe a 1/2 inch larger than that. The benefit of that is when you finish sewing the square, if it isn't completely nice and square, you may want to cut it down a little bit. And if you have made it a little bit larger, it will give you the option of doing that. But the simple math is just always make these 1 1/4 inches bigger than those. And again, you need 1 background one, 1 transition one, and 2 of the points ones. We're going to go ahead and set aside the center and corner squares and get ready to sew this thing. So what you're going to do are you're going to take your 2 point squares and then your background and transition one. For one of these, you're going to put it right sides together with your background square and line it up the best you can. The other one, you're going to put it right sides together with your transition square. Then you will take a ruler or a square edge and just go from one corner to the other corner diagonally and draw a line across there with your pencil. As you're doing this, be aware that this is the bias of the fabric. So if you're kind of doing it really hard with your pencil, it's possible to stretch this out of shape and then your final squares won't end up nice and neat. So do it kind of gently. Some people have those fancy like sandpaper backgrounds to hold it in place. That would help if you have one of those. But if not, just mark it pretty gently but well enough that you can see it from one corner to the other diagonally, as you can see has been done on both of these. Then you're going to take it back to your sewing machine, and using the line that's drawn on here for a guide, I'm going to stitch 1/4 inch on this side of it and 1/4 inch on the other side of it. I'm going to do that with both of these blocks. As I'm stitching, instead of tugging it or pulling it through my machine at all, I'm going to try to feed it through as gently as I can so that I don't have any stretching on the bias. Now that I have it stitched, I'm just going to take scissors or a rotary cutter and cut down that line in the middle. for both of my squares. And then when I open them up, I will have half square triangles. I'll need to go press those. And when I'm pressing them, again, I need to be really careful not to iron it and stretch it out on the bias, but just press it down flat with my iron. Okay, so I should have 2 of those and 2 of these. I'm going to go press those and then I'll be back. So here they are, sewn and pressed. And on all 4 of these, when I press the seam allowance, I pressed it towards the darker fabric. That should allow them to nest together better when I put them together. Anyway, you take either these 2 blocks or these 2, it doesn't matter. You're going to flip them over and do just what you did last time, where you draw a line from one corner to the other. I'm going to go ahead and do that for both of them. So you take one of each type of block and put them together. You want to, the fabric that's the same, you want to make sure that it ends up on opposite sides. So if it's here, it's going to be over here when you put them together. And then you line them up just as nice and neatly as you possibly can. The place where it's the most important of all for them to be lined up is in the center, so that you get a really nice sharp point. So to double check that I have them lined up correctly, I'm going to run a pin through right on the seam line. And if it's lined up correctly, it should come out the seam on the other side. Woo, and it did. So it looks like, if I can keep it just like that, I'm going to go ahead and actually keep that straight up and down and run a pin through this way to hold it in place. Then I'll take this back and stitch it a 1/4 inch on each side the way that we did before. And I'll do that with both of these remaining blocks. Now I've gone down and stitched these a 1/4 inch on each side of the line. And this time when we cut them apart, we should end up with 4 squares that are 1/4 square triangles. So here are my 4 1/4 square blocks that are already sewn and pressed. I did actually start with my blocks a little bit larger so that they would end up a little oversized so I could trim them down, because I know my sewing skills and I knew they weren't going to come out perfectly square. So I need to trim them down to 4.5 inches now. But it isn't as simple as sometimes, where if I would line up my 4.5 and 4.5 and just cut off the excess, if I did that, the points aren't going to match up correctly and it's going to turn out a little weird. It's a little trickier than that. What I need to do is make sure that the very center of my square is going to be at the very center of 4.5 inches. So 2 1/4 would be half of that. If I find the 2 1/4 mark and the 2 1/4 mark, there's a little dot there on my ruler, and I can actually line up this diagonal too, and then make sure that the center is exactly 2 1/4 inches by 2 1/4 inches. Then I'll trim off these 2 sides and flip the block around and then line it up with the 2 1/4, 2 1/4 again on the diagonal lines and trim off the other 2 sides. Now I have all 4 of them trimmed to exactly 4.5 inches, so I can bring in my other 4.5 inch squares that we set aside in the beginning and just arrange them into an Ohio star pattern. Then all I'll have left to do is go sew them together the way you would any other 9 patch. So I'll sew these 3 together, these 3 together, these 3 together, and then I'll stitch them together that direction. And there you have it, one of this month's transparent Ohio stars.